The sun was sinking low over the open plains when Agatha first saw it. The sky burned in shades of amber and crimson, stretching endlessly above the rolling prairie. Agatha Whitmore rode alone along the Dry Creek Trail, her posture straight despite the long miles behind her. She had grown used to traveling without company. Solitude did not frighten her. What frightened her was standing still. The wind brushed against her cheeks, carrying the scent of dust and wild sage. Her mare suddenly slowed hooves, scraping against loose gravel. Agatha gently pulled the reins. "Easy now," she murmured. That was when something caught the fading sunlight. A small flicker, a glint in the dirt. Curiosity stirred in her chest. She dismounted and knelt, brushing aside the powdery earth with careful fingers. Beneath the thin layer of dust lay a silver locket, half buried, as though the land itself had tried to claim it. It was delicate but strong, engraved with swirling patterns along its edges. Though scratched and worn, it carried the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of care and memory. Agatha hesitated before picking it up. Something about it felt familiar. She turned it over in her hand. The hinge was slightly bent. The chain had snapped clean through. "It must belong to someone nearby," she whispered to herself. Yet, when she looked around, the prairie stretched empty in every direction. She pressed her thumb against the edge and opened it. Her breath caught. Inside were two tiny portraits. On one side was a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, with serious eyes and dark hair neatly parted. On the other side was a girl, about 5 or 6, wearing a ribbon in her hair. The girl's expression was gentle, almost solemn. Agatha felt the world tilt. The girl looked like her, not perfectly, but close enough to make her pulse thunder in her ears. The shape of the eyes, the curve of the lips, even the faint dimple near the chin. "No," she whispered, her fingers trembling. Agatha had no photographs of herself as a child. No keepsakes. No proof she had ever belonged to anyone. She had grown up in a small Missouri boarding house for orphaned children. The matron there told her she had been found wandering near a wagon trail at the age of 5, with no name she could remember. They had called her Agnes at first, based on something she whispered through tears. Later she chose the name Agatha for herself. She had never known where she came from, never known who might have been searching for her. And now, in her hand was a silver locket, with a portrait that mirrored her own forgotten face. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought the plains might echo it back. She snapped, the locket closed, and stood quickly, scanning the horizon. Was someone nearby? Had the owner dropped it moments ago? Nothing but open land and a fading sun. The wind rose slightly, tugging at her skirts, urging her toward town before darkness swallowed the trail. Dry Creek was still a mile ahead. Agatha slipped the locket carefully into her coat pocket. "I'll ask in town," she murmured. Someone must be looking for it. But deep inside, she knew this was no ordinary lost item. As she mounted her horse and continued toward Dry Creek, her thoughts spiraled. What if the girl in the portrait truly was her? What if somewhere, someone had once carried this locket close to their heart? The idea frightened her more than loneliness ever had, because loneliness was familiar. Hope was not. Meanwhile, miles behind her, along the same trail, a man named Samuel Reed rode hard against the setting sun. His jaw was tight. His eyes scanned the ground relentlessly. The chain around his neck felt unbearably light. That morning, the silver locket his mother had given him, his last link to a sister lost on the frontier, had slipped away somewhere along this very path. And for the first time in years, Samuel felt the cold weight of failure press against his chest. He had promised his dying mother he would find her. Now, he had lost the only clue he possessed. The prairie darkened. Two strangers moved toward the same town, bound by the same silver locket. Neither of them knew that. By sundown tomorrow, their lives would never be the same. Samuel Reed had never forgiven himself for that day on the wagon trail. Even now, 15 years later, the memory came back, sharp as broken glass. Smoke, screaming horses, gunfire splitting the air, his mother's hand shoving him behind an overturned wagon, and his little sister, small, frightened, clutching her ribbon torn from sight. In the chaos, they searched for 3 days after the attack. 3 long days of riding in widening circles, calling her name until their voices cracked. But the frontier was merciless. It swallowed the weak. It buried the lost. His mother never stopped believing her daughter was alive. On her deathbed, she pressed the silver locket into Samuel's hand. Inside were the only 2 portraits she had managed to keep. Save Samuel at 10 years old, and his little sister, Agnes, at 5. "Find her," she had whispered, her voice thin but steady. "She's out there." Samuel had built his life around that promise. Every town he rode into, he asked questions. Every orphan house he passed, he searched records. He learned to read faces carefully, studying strangers for the faintest resemblance. And always, he carried the locket over his heart. Until today, he had been riding fence lines near Dry Creek when his horse startled at a rattlesnake. In the sudden jolt, the chain must have snapped. He hadn't noticed until he reached for it. Hours later, and when he did, it was gone. Samuel had turned his horse immediately, retracing every stretch of trail. He dismounted more than once, scanning the dirt, kneeling in the dust like a desperate man, searching for buried treasure. The sun had begun to sink before he accepted the truth. The prairie was wide. The earth was unforgiving, but he would not give up. He rode into Dry Creek just as lanterns flickered to life along the boardwalks. The town hummed with evening voices boots against wood, laughter spilling from the saloon. The low murmur of cattle drivers finishing their day. Samuel tied his horse outside the boarding house first. Travelers often turned in lost items there. Inside, Mrs. Hollis looked up from behind her counter. "Evenin', Mr. Reed." "Evenin', ma'am," he replied, removing his hat. "I'm looking for something I might have dropped along the east trail. A silver locket, about this big." He held his fingers apart. Engraved edges. Chain broken. Mrs. Hollis frowned thoughtfully. "No one's mentioned it yet." Samuel nodded once, though disappointment tightened his chest. "If anyone does, I'd appreciate word." He turned toward the door and froze. A woman stood near the staircase, watching him. She was dressed plainly for travel, dust still clinging to the hem of her skirt. Her posture was steady, but her eyes held something unsettled, something searching. Samuel felt a strange pull in his chest. She stepped forward slowly. "I believe," she said softly, "I found what you're looking for." Time seemed to stall. She reached into her coat pocket and drew out the silver locket. Even from across the room, Samuel recognized it instantly. The worn engraving, the small dent near the hinge. Relief crashed through him so hard, his knees nearly weakened. "That's it," he breathed. She placed it in his hand carefully, almost reverently. Samuel opened it. The 2 portraits stared back at him, unchanged by time. But when he lifted his gaze, his breath stopped. The woman standing before him had the same eyes as the little girl in the locket. Not just similar, the same steady depth, the same quiet strength behind them. His mind struggled to catch up with what his heart already knew. "You," he started, his voice rough. "You look like her." The woman swallowed, her composure wavering, like the girl in the portrait. "Yes." Silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. "I found it along the east trail," she said. "When I opened it, I thought—" She hesitated. "I thought I was imagining things." Samuel stepped closer, studying her face openly now. The shape of her jaw, the faint dimple near her chin. "My sister was lost along a wagon trail 15 years ago," he said carefully. "Her name was Agnes." The woman's hand trembled slightly. "My name," she whispered, "used to be Agnes." The room seemed to grow smaller. Samuel's pulse pounded in his ears. "Used to be. I was found wandering near a trail when I was 5, she continued. "I don't remember much. They said I kept saying a name that sounded like Agnes. Hope. Dangerous. Fragile hope rose inside him like a sunrise after a long winter." "What's your name now?" he asked. "Agatha." Samuel stared at her, emotions colliding. Fear of being wrong, fear of daring to believe. But the resemblance was undeniable, and for the first time in 15 years, The promise he made to his mother did not feel impossible. It felt within reach. The boarding house parlor had grown quiet. Even the usual clatter from the saloon next door seemed distant, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Samuel and Agatha stood only a few feet apart. Neither moved, neither breathed easily. Samuel forced himself to speak carefully, afraid that one wrong word might shatter whatever fragile thread had begun to form between them. "My sister had a scar," he said slowly, "on her left wrist, small, from when she tried to climb a broken fence back in Missouri." Agatha's eyes widened. Without a word, she pulled back the cuff of her sleeve. There it was, a thin, pale line just above her wrist bone. She had carried it her whole life without knowing its origin. Samuel felt his throat tighten. His hands trembled as he reached forward, but stopped short of touching her. "Fi, remember that day," he whispered. "You cried because Mother said you'd scar." Agatha's breath shook. I remember a fence, and someone lifting me." Tears blurred her vision. Memories, long buried and broken, rose like ghosts through fog. A woman's gentle voice, a boy holding her hand, smoke, fear. She staggered slightly, and Samuel instinctively steadied her. The contact sent something powerful through them both, not romance, not yet, but recognition. Blood calling to blood. "This can't be coincidence," Agatha whispered. "No," Samuel said softly. "It can't." They moved to sit by the window, lantern light casting warm gold across their faces. Samuel placed the locket between them on the small wooden table. "Tell me what you remember," he said. Agatha closed her eyes. "I remember traveling in a wagon. I remember you." She opened her eyes and met his. "You used to braid grass into my hair and tell me stories about cowboys." A faint, stunned laugh escaped Samuel. "You hated the stories," he said. "You said cowboys were dirty." Agatha blinked, and then she laughed too, a broken, tearful sound. "I did." The sound of shared memory settled between them like sacred ground. Samuel's voice grew quieter. "The day we lost you, there was an attack. Everything happened fast. Mother thought you were behind the wagon. When the smoke cleared, I wasn't," Agatha finished. She swallowed hard. "I remember loud noises. I remember running. A man picked me up. I don't know if he was saving me or stealing me. I only remember waking up days later with strangers." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he listened. "They said they found me alone near a river. No family, no name, just a frightened child." Agatha looked down at her hands. "I stopped remembering after a while," she admitted. "It hurt too much." Samuel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. 15 years of searching, doubting, hoping, and now she was sitting across from him, flesh and bone. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. The words landed heavily. Agatha had built her life on independence. She had survived by never expecting anyone to stay. But hearing those words stirred something unfamiliar and tender inside her. "Why didn't you stop looking?" she asked. Samuel's gaze softened. "Because Mother never did. Even when she was dying, she believed you were alive." He tapped the locket gently. "She made me promise." Agatha's eyes filled again. "She never gave up on me. Never." The weight of that truth pressed into her chest until she could barely breathe. All her life, she had believed she had been abandoned. But she hadn't been abandoned. She had been lost and loved. The lantern flickered softly between them. Samuel hesitated before speaking again. "There's more." Agatha looked up. "I didn't just stay in Dry Creek by chance," he continued. "I've followed rumors for years. Reports of a girl found near the Missouri Trail. Every time, it led nowhere." He gave a faint, tired smile. "Until now." Agatha studied him carefully. He looked worn, not just from ranch work, but from years of carrying hope like a burden. "You really believed you'd find me," she said. "I never stopped." Silence fell again, but this time it was not heavy. It was steady, grounded. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky deep violet. Samuel stood and offered his hand. "Come with me tomorrow," he said gently. "There's something I want to show you." "What is it?" "The place we buried Mother." Agatha's heart skipped. He continued softly. She deserves to know her daughter made it home. The word home echoed inside her. She had traveled for years without one. Now, as night settled over Dry Creek, she realized something impossible had happened. The silver locket had not simply returned to its owner. It had returned her to her family. And for the first time in her life, Agatha did not feel like she was drifting through the West alone. She felt anchored, and somewhere deep in her heart, something long fractured had begun to mend. Morning came soft and golden over Dry Creek. Agatha had barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, fragments of childhood flickered through her mind. Grass fields in Missouri, the warmth of a woman's embrace, a boy's laughter echoing beside her. For years she had believed those were only dreams she invented to comfort herself. Now she knew they were memories. Samuel waited outside the boarding house at sunrise, his horse saddled, his posture steady, but his eyes thoughtful. He looked different this morning, not burdened, but cautious, as if afraid that daylight might undo what the night had promised. "Ready?" he asked gently. Agatha nodded. They rode west of town, toward a quiet rise overlooking open prairie. The land there rolled gently, dotted with wildflowers that swayed in the breeze. It was peaceful, removed from the noise of town and the harshness of trail dust. Samuel dismounted first. She loved this view, he said quietly, said it reminded her of home. Agatha followed, her boots pressing into the soft earth. A simple wooden cross stood near the crest of the hill. Time had weathered it, but the carving was still visible. Elisa Reed, beloved mother. Agatha's breath caught in her throat. She had imagined her mother 1,000 different ways, faceless, distant, unreal. But standing here, seeing her name carved into wood, made her achingly real. Samuel removed his hat. "I brought her here 12 years ago," he said. "I wanted her somewhere peaceful." Agatha stepped closer to the grave. The wind lifted her hair slightly, brushing it against her cheek. "She never stopped believing I was alive?" she asked softly. "Not once." Agatha knelt, her fingers brushing the grass. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not to Samuel, but to the woman beneath the earth. "I didn't know how to come back." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they did not feel like the tears of loneliness she had cried as a child. These were different. They carried warmth with them. Samuel watched her quietly, giving her space. After a long moment, she rose to her feet and turned to him. "I used to wonder why I survived," she admitted. "Why I was the one found, and not—" Her voice faltered. Samuel stepped closer. "You survived because you're strong," he said firmly. "You always were." Agatha studied him carefully. "You don't blame yourself," she asked, "for losing you?" He gave a faint, sad smile. "Every day for 15 years. She felt that confession deeply. "It wasn't your fault," she said softly. "We were children." The truth of it seemed to ease something in him. They stood together in silence, the wind carrying wildflower scent across the hill. After a while, Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver locket. "I kept this close all these years," he said, "but I think it belongs with you now." Agatha looked at it, then at him. "It was your promise," she said. "It still is," he replied. "Only now the promise is kept." He fastened the repaired chain gently around her neck. The silver rested against her collarbone, warm from his hands. The weight of it did not feel heavy. It felt grounding. Agatha touched it lightly. "For so long, I thought I had no past," she said. "No one looking for me." Samuel's voice softened. "You were always loved." The words settled into her bones. The prairie stretched endlessly beyond them, no longer empty, but full of possibility. "Will you stay in Dry Creek?" Samuel asked carefully. Agatha hesitated. She had built her life on movement. Staying meant trusting that something would last. "I don't know yet," she admitted honestly, "but I'd like to try." A slow smile crossed Samuel's face. "That's enough." They remained there until the sun climbed higher, warming the land. Before leaving, Agatha pressed her palm against the wooden cross. "I'm home," she whispered. And for the first time, the word did not feel borrowed. As they rode back toward town, side by side, the space between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt like the beginning of something restored. The silver locket caught the sunlight, flashing brightly against the open sky, no longer a symbol of loss, but of reunion. And as Dry Creek came into view, Agatha realized that the West had not taken everything from her. It had, in its own quiet way, led her back. The days that followed felt almost unreal to Agatha. Dry Creek no longer seemed like just another stop along a restless journey. The town had changed not because its buildings were different or its streets less dusty, but because she now walked them with purpose, with family. Samuel showed her everything: the small ranch just outside town, built with his own hands; the stable he repaired every spring; the fence line he rode at dawn. He spoke of cattle prices and stubborn horses, but beneath it all was something deeper, a quiet joy that had not been there before. Agatha noticed it. "You smile more," she said one evening, as they sat on the ranch porch, watching the sky shift from gold to violet. Samuel chuckled softly. "I suppose I do." The prairie wind moved gently through the tall grass, carrying the peaceful rhythm of crickets beginning their nightly song. For the first time in her life, Agatha felt the strange comfort of familiarity. The land did not feel vast and lonely. It felt protective. She reached up and touched the silver locket, resting against her chest. "I used to think this was a reminder of what I didn't have," she admitted. "Now it feels like proof that I was never forgotten." Samuel leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "I carried it all those years, believing it was the only piece of you left," he said. "Turns out it was leading me to you." Agatha smiled. The evening sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in streaks of crimson and amber, the same kind of sunset that had shone the day she found the locket buried in dust. "Do you ever wonder," she asked quietly, "what would have happened if I hadn't seen it?" Samuel looked out over the land. "I don't," he replied. She glanced at him, surprised. "Why not?" "Because some things," he said steadily, "are meant to find their way back, even if it takes time." The words lingered between them. Agatha had spent years running from questions about her past. Now she found herself leaning into the future instead. "I don't want to leave," she said softly. Samuel turned toward her fully. "Then don't." It was simple. No pressure, no expectations. Just truth. Agatha looked out across the ranch, the fencing stretching into the distance, the barn standing strong against the fading light, the endless sky above. For years, she had believed staying meant vulnerability, that attachment meant loss. But she had already endured loss, and what she had found was stronger. "I think I'd like to help you expand the north field," she said, a teasing light in her eyes. "The fencing is crooked." Samuel laughed, a full, unguarded sound that carried across the prairie. "It is not crooked. It leans," she corrected. "Then I suppose I'll need help fixing it." She stood, stepping to the edge of the porch. The last rays of sunlight wrapped around her figure, catching the silver locket so it gleamed brightly. Two strangers had once carried the same piece of silver, one in memory, one in dust. Now they stood together, no longer divided by distance or doubt. Agatha turned back toward Samuel. "For so long, I thought my story began with being lost," she said. "But maybe it began with being loved." Samuel rose and joined her at the railing. It always did. They stood shoulder to shoulder as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. The prairie darkened slowly, but neither of them felt the fear of night. They had faced worse darkness before, and they had found each other through it. Agatha slipped her hand into Samuel's, not as a frightened child, but as a sister who had come home. The silver locket rested warm against her heart. No longer a mystery, no longer a question. It was a promise fulfilled. And as the first stars appeared in the wide western sky, Dry Creek no longer felt like a passing town. It felt like the place their story had been waiting to begin again. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.